Imagine standing in a narrow mountain pass, the air heavy with dust and sweat, knowing that by sunset you will almost certainly be dead. Not because you are weak, not because you lack weapons, but because an army so large it seems endless is marching straight toward you. Thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more, and behind you there is nowhere left to run. This is not a movie scene. This is not a legend invented to inspire. This is the real moment that gave birth to one of the most powerful stories of courage in human history. A moment when just 300 men chose to face the greatest empire the world had ever known. This is the story of the Battle of Thermopylae. A small, disciplined force can change history even when victory is impossible, and that idea sits at the very heart of the Battle of Thermopylae. When we look at history, it is easy to assume that size always wins, that the biggest army, the richest empire, or the loudest power will inevitably crush anything smaller in its path. Thermopylae proves how wrong that assumption can be. The Spartans and their allies did not walk into that narrow pass believing they would defeat Persia in a traditional sense. They knew the numbers. They knew the scale of the Persian Empire. They knew that Xerxes commanded a force unlike anything Greece had ever faced. Yet they also understood something deeper, something far more powerful than numbers alone. They understood that discipline, preparation, unity, and purpose can bend the direction of history, even when survival is not part of the outcome. The Spartans were not special because they were fearless or superhuman. They were special because of how they were trained to think. From childhood, Spartan soldiers were taught that the individual mattered less than the group, that personal fear meant nothing compared to duty, and that retreat without orders was worse than death. This mindset created soldiers who could hold a line under pressure that would break ordinary men. At Thermopylae, this discipline turned a narrow strip of land into a weapon. Every step the Persians took forward was met by shields locked together, spears striking in rhythm, and men who trusted the soldier next to them with their lives. In that moment, numbers stopped being the deciding factor. What truly makes this keynote powerful is that the Spartans did not fight with illusions of victory. Leonidas chose his men knowing they would almost certainly die. Each soldier marched to Thermopylae aware that he might never see his home again. That kind of clarity changes everything. When fear of death no longer controls you, your actions become sharper, your resolve stronger, and your presence more intimidating. The Persian soldiers, many of whom were conscripts from conquered lands, fought because they were ordered to. The Spartans fought because they chose to. That difference echoed through every clash of shields in the pass. Even in defeat, the Spartans won something greater than survival. By holding Thermopylae, they exposed a truth that spread across Greece like fire. Persia was not unstoppable. The greatest empire in the world could be delayed, wounded, and resisted. This belief mattered more than any tactical victory. Before Thermopylae, many Greek states doubted whether resistance was even possible. After Thermopylae, they knew it was. The courage of a few men reshaped the thinking of an entire civilization, and that shift in mindset helped lead to later victories at Salamis and Plataea. History often remembers winners, but Thermopylae reminds us that influence does not belong exclusively to those who survive. The Spartans lost the battle, but they seized control of the narrative. Their stand became a symbol that outlived the Persian invasion itself. Xerxes captured ground, burned cities, and marched deeper into Greece. Yet it was Leonidas who captured memory. This tells us something essential about how history works. Power can conquer land, but meaning is earned through action, sacrifice, and example. The idea that a small, disciplined force can change history also speaks to timing. Thermopylae was not random. It happened at a moment when Greece was divided and uncertain. The stand at the pass bought time, not just in days, but in psychological space. It allowed Greek leaders to rally support, to argue for unity, and to prepare defenses. Without that delay, Persia might have overwhelmed Greece before it could organize a meaningful response. One disciplined stand created a chain reaction that affected battles fought months later, Far from Thermopylae itself, there is also something deeply human about this lesson. It applies far beyond ancient battlefields. Throughout history, small groups with strong discipline and belief have repeatedly shifted the course of events. Revolutions, resistance movements, scientific breakthroughs, and cultural changes often begin with a few individuals who refuse to accept that size or power alone defines what is possible. Thermopylae stands as an early, dramatic example of this truth, carved into history with blood and steel. The Spartans were not fighting for glory as individuals. Their names, except for Leonidas, are mostly lost to time. They fought for an idea of duty that extended beyond themselves. That collective identity turned 300 men into something far larger than their physical presence. In a strange way, their willingness to disappear as individuals is what made them immortal as a group. When people remember Thermopylae, they do not count bodies. They remember resolve. This keynote also challenges the way we define success. If success only means survival or victory, then Thermopylae was a failure. But history does not treat it that way. Instead, it treats it as one of the most meaningful moments in Western history. This forces us to reconsider what it means to succeed when the odds are against us. Sometimes success is not about reaching the end, but about shaping what comes after. The Spartans did not live to see Greece free from Persian threat, but their actions helped make that freedom possible. In the end, the power of a small, disciplined force lies not in how long it can last, but in how deeply it can influence others. Thermopylae shows that when people stand with clarity, unity, and purpose, even their defeat can echo louder than an enemy's victory, shaping beliefs, decisions, and actions far beyond the moment in which they fall. Thermopylae was not about winning the battle, but about buying time and inspiring unity, and this idea is essential to understanding why the sacrifice at the Hot Gates mattered so deeply to the future of Greece. When King Leonidas and his men marched north, they were not chasing a glorious victory or dreaming of conquering Persia. They were walking into a calculated delay, a strategic pause designed to slow an unstoppable force just long enough for something greater to form behind them. In war, time can be more valuable than territory, and Thermopylae proves that a few days, when used wisely, can shape the fate of civilizations. At the moment Persia invaded, Greece was fractured. City-states argued endlessly, suspicious of one another, unwilling to surrender authority to a unified command. Some believed resistance was hopeless and chose submission. Others waited, hoping someone else would make the first move. This division was exactly what Xerxes relied on. A massive army does not just crush bodies, it crushes confidence, and fear was Persia's greatest weapon. Thermopylae was meant to strike directly at that fear by showing that Persia could be stopped, even if only briefly. Leonidas understood the psychology of war. By choosing Thermopylae, he selected a battlefield where time itself could be controlled. The narrow pass limited Persian movement, forcing their vast army to advance slowly and inefficiently. Each failed assault wasted Persian strength and morale while buying precious hours for the Greeks. Those hours allowed messages to spread, leaders to organize, fleets to position, and plans to solidify. Without that delay, Persian forces could have surged south before the Greek navy was ready at Salamis, altering the entire course of the war. The power of Thermopylae lies in the fact that it transformed despair into determination. Before the battle, many Greeks believed Persia's victory was inevitable. After watching the Persian army stall against a small force, that belief began to crack. If Spartans could stand their ground against the empire, then Athens could fight at sea. Corinth could supply troops, and smaller city-states could commit without feeling foolish or doomed. Thermopylae became a rallying point, a shared story that crossed political and cultural boundaries between Greek states. This moment of unity did not happen instantly, but it began there. The sacrifice at Thermopylae created moral pressure. Once men had willingly died to hold the line, hesitation became shameful, neutrality became cowardice. Those who had considered surrender now faced a choice: join the resistance or be remembered as those who stood aside while others bled for Greece. In this way, Thermopylae forced unity not through commands, but through example. The battle also reframed the war in human terms. Xerxes fought with overwhelming force, using fear as a tool to secure submission. Leonidas countered this with meaning. He turned a retreat into a stand, a delay into a symbol. By choosing death openly, the Spartans denied Persia its psychological advantage. Fear loses power when people are willing to face it head on. That shift resonated across Greece and undermined the image of Persian invincibility. Buying time is often an invisible victory. There are no grand celebrations for delays, no monuments for strategic pauses. Yet history repeatedly shows that time changes outcomes. Thermopylae gave Greece breathing room. It allowed Athens to evacuate its population, saving lives that would later support the war effort. It gave the Greek navy confidence and coordination, leading directly to the decisive naval battle at Salamis. Without Thermopylae, these preparations might have been rushed, incomplete, or impossible. Unity is rarely born from comfort. It emerges under pressure when people are forced to choose between standing together or falling apart. Thermopylae applied that pressure. The image of Spartans standing shoulder to shoulder against overwhelming odds became a mirror for Greece itself. Either the states would stand together, or they would fall one by one. The stand at the pass made the cost of division painfully clear. This keynote also reveals a deeper truth about leadership. Leonidas did not demand unity through authority. He created it through action. By placing himself and his men directly in harm's way, he removed any doubt about commitment. Leaders who ask others to sacrifice without sharing the risk inspire hesitation. Leaders who stand at the front inspire loyalty. Thermopylae became a lesson not just in military strategy, but in moral leadership. The battle's influence extended far beyond the battlefield. Poets, messengers, and survivors carried the story throughout Greece. Each retelling strengthened its effect. Thermopylae became proof that resistance was not foolish, that sacrifice was not meaningless, and that unity was achievable. The story bound states together through shared admiration and shared responsibility. Even the defeat itself contributed to unity. Because the Spartans did not retreat, there was no confusion about what had happened. The stand was complete, final, and undeniable. This clarity mattered. It allowed Greeks to frame the event not as a loss, but as a deliberate act of resistance. The narrative became controlled by those who stood, not by those who advanced. Thermopylae teaches that sometimes the most important battles are not meant to be won. They are meant to change the conditions of the war itself. By buying time and inspiring unity, Leonidas and his men altered the trajectory of Greek history. Their stand turned scattered states into a collective force capable of facing an empire. In the end, Thermopylae reminds us that unity often begins with sacrifice, and that time, when purchased at great cost, can become the foundation upon which future victories are built. Even if those who bought it do not live to see the result, geography and strategy can neutralize even the largest armies, and the Battle of Thermopylae stands as one of the clearest examples of this truth in human history. When we think of power in warfare, we often imagine numbers, weapons, and wealth. Yet Thermopylae reminds us that where a battle is fought, and how it is fought, can matter far more than how many soldiers march into it. The Spartans and their Greek allies did not attempt to confront Persia on open ground, where the empire's vast numbers, cavalry, and archers would have overwhelmed them within hours. Instead, they chose a place where the land itself became an ally, turning a hopeless situation into a meaningful stand. Thermopylae was not chosen by accident. The narrow coastal pass was squeezed between steep mountains and the sea, creating a natural choke point. At certain sections, the path was so tight that only a handful of men could stand shoulder to shoulder. This geography stripped the Persian army of its greatest advantage. Tens of thousands of soldiers meant nothing if only a few hundred could fight at any given moment. Cavalry could not maneuver, archers had limited effectiveness, and the sheer mass of the army became a logistical burden rather than a strength. Every additional Persian soldier added pressure to supply lines without increasing battlefield effectiveness. The Greeks understood this perfectly. Spartan warfare was built around heavy infantry, discipline, and formation fighting. Their hoplite phalanx was designed to hold ground, not to chase or retreat. In the narrow pass of Thermopylae, this style of warfare reached its full potential. Shields overlapped, spears extended forward, and each man protected the next. The terrain ensured that the phalanx could not be flanked or surrounded, allowing a small, cohesive force to fight as if it were much larger. Strategy amplified geography. The Spartans rotated their front-line fighters to maintain stamina, while the Persians were forced to attack continuously, exhausting their troops. Persian commanders could not deploy their full strength or adapt their tactics. Every assault became predictable, and predictability is deadly in war. The Greeks used controlled retreats to draw enemies forward, then counterattacked in tight formation, maximizing damage while minimizing exposure. The psychological effect of this strategic advantage was enormous. Persian soldiers expected to overwhelm their enemies quickly, as they had done across much of the known world. Instead, they found themselves blocked, cut down, and unable to advance. Confusion spread, morale suffered. Xerxes, watching from his throne, reportedly leapt up in frustration multiple times as wave after wave failed. Geography had turned confidence into doubt. Thermopylae also demonstrates how understanding terrain can compensate for limited resources. The Greeks lacked numbers, wealth, and the vast logistical support of the Persian Empire. What they possessed was knowledge of their land and a willingness to use it intelligently. By forcing Persia to fight on unfavorable ground, the Greeks inverted the balance of power. The empire's size became a weakness, not a strength. This principle echoes throughout history. Armies that ignore terrain often pay the price, no matter how powerful they are. Thermopylae shows that strategy is not just about bravery or strength, but about insight and preparation. Leonidas did not simply stand in the pass because it was narrow. He understood how that narrowness would shape every aspect of the battle, from movement and supply to morale and command. Even the Persian elite unit, the Immortals, could not overcome the strategic disadvantage imposed by the terrain. Their training, equipment, and reputation meant little when they were forced into the same narrow front as less experienced troops. The battlefield equalized everyone. Skill and discipline mattered more than status or numbers. The betrayal that ended the Greek defense further highlights the importance of geography. The hidden mountain path that allowed Persian forces to outflank the Greeks was not initially known or guarded. Once the Persians gained access to this route, the strategic balance collapsed. The pass could only be held if its geography remained fully controlled. This moment reinforces the lesson that strategy requires constant awareness and adaptation. A single overlooked path can undo even the most brilliant defensive position. Despite this, the effectiveness of the chosen terrain had already achieved its purpose. The delay inflicted at Thermopylae was only possible because geography and strategy worked together. Without the narrow pass, the stand would have been crushed in a day. Without disciplined strategy, the terrain alone would not have saved the defenders. It was the combination that made resistance meaningful. Thermopylae also teaches that strategy can shape narrative. By choosing where and how to fight, the Greeks influenced how the battle would be remembered. A defeat on open ground would have been forgotten as another failed resistance. A stand in a narrow pass against overwhelming odds became legendary. Geography turned a loss into a symbol. This lesson extends beyond warfare. In any conflict, whether political, social, or personal, understanding the environment and choosing the right ground can change outcomes. Facing a stronger opponent head-on often leads to defeat. Choosing the conditions under which you engage can level the field. Thermopylae remains powerful because it shows that intelligence and planning can challenge even the greatest concentrations of power. In the end, Thermopylae proves that no army, no matter how large, is invincible when forced to fight on unfavorable ground, and that thoughtful strategy combined with the right terrain can allow even a small force to stand against the weight of an empire and leave a mark that echoes far beyond the battlefield. Leonidas and the Spartans chose honor and duty over survival. And this choice defines the true meaning of the Battle of Thermopylae, more than the clash of weapons or the size of the armies involved. At its core, Thermopylae was not simply a military encounter, but a moral decision made by men who understood exactly what awaited them and still moved forward without hesitation. In a world where survival is often seen as the highest goal, the Spartans embraced a different value system, one in which duty to law, community, and legacy outweighed the instinct to live at any cost. From the moment Leonidas accepted command, he knew the odds were impossible. He knew that Persia's army dwarfed anything Greece could field at that moment. He also knew that retreat was an option, that he could delay briefly and then withdraw to fight another day. But Spartan law and culture shaped his thinking. Spartans were taught that their lives belonged not to themselves, but to Sparta. A Spartan king was expected to lead from the front, to share the fate of his soldiers, and to place the survival of the state above his own existence. Leonidas' decision to bring only 300 Spartans was not arrogance, but intention. Each man was selected because he had already fulfilled his duty to Sparta by fathering a son. This detail alone reveals how deeply survival was separated from purpose. These men were not marching to preserve their own futures. They were marching to protect the future of their people, even if they would never see it. Their personal lives ended the moment they stepped into the pass, and they accepted that reality without protest. Honor, in the Spartan sense, was not about praise or recognition. It was about obedience to law and tradition. Retreating from Thermopylae once the battle had begun would have violated everything they had been raised to believe. Spartan mothers were said to tell their sons to return with their shield or on it, a phrase that captured the idea that survival without honor was meaningless. At Thermopylae, this philosophy was not spoken as poetry, but lived as reality. When the betrayal by Ephialtes revealed the hidden mountain path, Leonidas faced the defining moment of his life. He could have ordered a full retreat. Some allies did withdraw, preserving their forces for later battles. But Leonidas stayed, not because he believed he could still win, but because leaving would have broken the moral foundation upon which Spartan society rested. His duty as king demanded that he remain, even when the outcome was certain. This choice transformed the battle. What had been a defensive stand became a deliberate sacrifice. The Spartans advanced beyond the narrowest part of the pass, abandoning their strongest position. This act was not tactical. It was symbolic. It showed that they were no longer fighting to hold ground, but to fulfill an obligation. In doing so, they stripped death of its power over them. Once survival was no longer the goal, fear lost its grip. The courage displayed in those final hours was not born from recklessness, but from acceptance. The Spartans fought with a calm intensity that shocked their enemies. They knew there would be no retreat, no rescue, no victory parade. Their strength came from certainty. In contrast, many Persian soldiers fought because they were ordered to, driven by fear of punishment or loyalty to an empire that stretched far beyond their personal lives. The Spartans fought for something immediate and deeply personal, their identity and their law. Leonidas' death did not weaken his men, it hardened them. The battle around his body became fierce, not because they hoped to save him, but because defending their fallen king was part of their duty. Even after their weapons broke, they continued to fight with whatever they had. This was not madness. It was the final expression of a life lived according to a single, unbreakable code. The power of choosing honor over survival lies in its ripple effect. The Spartans' sacrifice forced others to confront their own values. Greek states that had hesitated were shamed into action. Leaders who had doubted the possibility of resistance found renewed resolve. Thermopylae became a moral benchmark. If these men could give everything without hesitation, how could others justify doing nothing? This concept of duty transcending life itself is uncomfortable in the modern world, where individual survival and personal fulfillment are often seen as ultimate goals. Yet Thermopylae challenges us to consider what happens when a society defines itself by shared responsibility rather than personal gain. The Spartans were not free in the modern sense, but they were unified in purpose, and that unity gave their actions extraordinary weight. It is important to recognize that the Spartans did not believe death itself was glorious. What mattered was how one lived and what one stood for. Death was simply the final cost of staying true to their principles. This distinction is why Thermopylae has endured as a story of dignity rather than despair. The Spartans did not seek death. They accepted it as the price of consistency between belief and action. Leonidas' legacy is not found in conquest or empire. It is found in the example he set. He showed that leadership is not about preserving one's position, but about embodying the values one expects others to follow. By standing where he knew he would fall, he ensured that his choice would never be forgotten. In the end, the decision to choose honor and duty over survival gave Thermopylae its lasting power, because it revealed that there are moments in history where how people choose to face inevitable loss matters more than whether they live or die, and that when individuals align their actions fully with their values, their influence can outlast empires and reshape the meaning of victory itself. The true power of Thermopylae lies in its legacy, not its outcome, and this is why the story continues to resonate more than 2,000 years after the battle itself. On paper, Thermopylae was a defeat. The Persians advanced, the Greeks fell, and the road into Greece was opened. Yet history does not remember Thermopylae as a failure. It remembers it as a turning point, a moment that redefined what resistance could mean and how sacrifice could shape the future long after the battlefield fell silent. Legacy is not built in the moment of action, but in the memory that action leaves behind. The Spartans did not control how the battle ended, but they shaped how it would be remembered. By choosing to stand rather than retreat, they created a story powerful enough to outlive the empire that defeated them. Persia, for all its size and wealth, left behind ruins and records. Thermopylae left behind meaning. What makes this legacy so enduring is that it speaks to universal human experiences. It is a story about facing overwhelming odds, about making choices when the outcome is already known, and about defining success in terms other than survival. These themes transcend culture, time, and geography. Anyone who has ever stood alone in defense of a principle can recognize something of themselves in the Spartans at Thermopylae. The legacy of Thermopylae also lies in how it reshaped Greek identity. Before the Persian Wars, the Greeks primarily identified as citizens of individual city-states. After Thermopylae, there was a growing sense of shared destiny. The sacrifice at the pass became a symbol of what it meant to be Greek, not Spartan, Athenian, or Corinthian, but part of a broader cultural world that valued freedom, self-rule, and collective responsibility. This shared memory strengthened resolve during the darkest moments of the war. When Athens was burned and fields were destroyed, Thermopylae reminded the Greeks why they were fighting. It transformed suffering into purpose. Without that moral anchor, the temptation to surrender might have been overwhelming. Legacy gave the Greeks something to hold on to when circumstances offered little hope. Thermopylae also influenced how future generations understood heroism. Unlike tales of conquest and domination, this story centered on loss and sacrifice. It suggested that greatness is not always measured by what one gains, but by what one is willing to give. This idea challenged traditional definitions of victory and expanded the moral vocabulary of history. Writers, poets, and philosophers returned to Thermopylae again and again, each time reshaping its meaning for their own era. In ancient Greece, it became a lesson in civic duty. In later centuries, it became a symbol of resistance against tyranny. In the modern world, it often represents standing firm against injustice or overwhelming pressure. The fact that the same story can carry different meanings across time is proof of its deep legacy. Even those who opposed the Greeks could not erase Thermopylae's influence. Xerxes won the ground but lost control of the narrative. His empire failed to destroy the story that formed around the battle. In many ways, that story undermined Persian authority more effectively than any sword. Power that relies on fear struggles against stories that inspire courage. Legacy also shapes behavior. The memory of Thermopylae influenced Greek commanders in later battles, reminding them that morale and belief could outweigh numbers. It inspired discipline, unity, and commitment. The Spartans themselves carried the legacy forward, using it as a benchmark for future generations. To live up to Thermopylae became a standard of honor. This keynote also reveals a deeper truth about how history works. Events do not become significant solely because of their immediate consequences. They become significant because of the meanings people attach to them. Thermopylae mattered not because it stopped Persia permanently, but because it changed how people thought about resistance, courage, and unity. The legacy of Thermopylae continues because it raises uncomfortable questions. What would you do if you knew you would lose? Would you walk away to preserve yourself, or would you stand to protect something larger than you? These questions have no easy answers, and that is why the story endures. It forces reflection rather than offering simple lessons. In the modern world, Thermopylae is often romanticized, sometimes oversimplified, yet its core remains intact. It reminds us that even in failure, there can be power. That even when outcomes cannot be controlled, choices still matter. The Spartans could not change the fact that Persia would break through the pass, but they could control how they faced that reality. Ultimately, Thermopylae survives in memory because it speaks to the human desire for meaning in struggle. It shows that legacy is built not by those who always win, but by those whose actions inspire others to act differently. The battle ended in silence and death, but its echo shaped the course of history, proving that some defeats are so powerful they redefine victory itself.